Spain. And it was in Spain where after about 3 or 4 years, they said to me, Gary, you're in a really cool expat package, but if you want to stay any longer, you'll have to switch to a local salary. And that was when I became an entrepreneur back in 2005. I set up a company, first an offline real estate business called called Ad Infinitum, and that did okay, but around 2007 we started to realize that the market was really slowing, and it was really difficult month after month to know that you always had to start from scratch. So in 2006, I set up an online version of it, a kind of property search engine similar to Zoopla, and we raised about $3 million in funding and eventually sold the company a couple years ago. But in the interim, after about 5 years of running the company, I decided that I wanted a change of pace, especially since Spain was going through an economic crisis, and I kind of was thinking about going back to the US. And then a friend of mine said, hey, why don't you come to a business school in Madrid called IE Business School? They're looking to revamp their entrepreneurial program. They need people who are more entrepreneurial. Why don't you work there? I did that for about 1 year teaching and also setting the venture lab up. And then a year into that, Telefónica came to me and said, we're looking to do something similar, but now in a corporate setting. Would you come and help us set up Wayra? And so that was back in about 2010. And it was actually this guy that I ended up having to speak to. His name is Jose Maria. He, at that point, was the CEO of Telefónica in Latin America, and now he's the CEO of Telefónica globally. And what he explained to me when I said, well, why would a corporate want to work with startups? He said, well, we as Telefónica understand that we have a really big mission. If we want to survive in the 21st century, we have to switch from being an analog telco to being a digital telco. And we just don't have the people internally to be able to do that. We need to work more and more with the startups, and not by buying them once they become very, very large, but from a much earlier stage. So the idea was that startups would be able to bring innovation to Telefónica, things that Telefónica had tried before but really could never be as agile as a startup in doing, whereas Telefónica would be able to help the startups by bringing scale. So I don't know how many of you know what Telefónica is. You know it better in the UK as O2. Telefónica is the parent company behind O2. We currently operate in about 21 different countries around the world. And it's a very, very big company, right? 350 million users, 20,000 stores, lots of money in revenue, et cetera, et cetera. But again, the idea is that Telefónica realizes that its core business of connectivity, used to be like making phone calls, now no one really makes that many phone calls anymore, is going down. So we need to find, even as the number of terminals is going up and the amount of data that people want is going up, so what this means is that at the end of the day, we have revenues that are at best flat. And so if you're losing your core revenues, the only way to kind of change that is to start to find new sources of revenue that are going to continue to make you relevant. Because if you want to understand what this means in practical terms, if before people used to have to kind of pay roaming charges when they went on vacation, or if when you wanted to send a message to a family member, you had to kind of send an SMS, and I don't remember how much you used to charge for SMSs, but you used to have to pay for them, and then all of a sudden one day WhatsApp comes and says, why should we have to pay? We can just do it for free over the landline, over the phone lines or whatever. All of a sudden Telefónica is losing billions of dollars that before it was making in people paying for SMSs. Same thing with Skype. If before, you'd have to make a phone call when you travel to tell your parents that you made it or your loved ones that you made it, and now you can just FaceTime them. Again, that's another source of revenue that Telefónica just lost. So the idea was that we understood that competing against these companies is really, really difficult because they have an ability to learn and adapt to the customer much more quickly than big corporations are ever going to be able to do. And I think you can kind of see the way this has played out over time as well. A company like Telefónica, it took about 89 years to kind of get to 150 million customers. It took Facebook about 5 years, and it took WhatsApp about 2 years. Right? And also, if you look to kind of which are the big companies in the world right now, at least measured by market capitalization, if you look back to 2001, it would have been companies like GE, Microsoft, Exxon, Citi, Walmart. If you look at 2016, they're all tech companies. It would be Apple, Google, also call it Google, Alphabet, Microsoft, Amazon, and Facebook. And what's really interesting is that in a lot of those cases, the founders are, or until very recently were, still part of the operation of the business. They still were able to think very entrepreneurially in a way that large corporations simply don't. I mean, these companies have entrepreneurship within their DNA, and companies like Telefónica actually just really don't, right? So the question is, how are you going to compete with these companies if you continue to do what you've always done? Again, this is kind of another example if you look at kind of Amazon. And I basically took this slide from a presentation that a guy named Milken did a little while back. Michael Milken is a billionaire. If you ever saw Wall Street, I think the original Wall Street movie was based on him. He made a lot of money and then was sent to jail, but he's still worth like a few billion, so he's still happy. And the idea is he was looking at kind of when Amazon first came out in the late 90s and how people were analyzing it, and they were saying, Barnes and Nobles, this is a big kind of bookstore in New York or in the US, they're never going to really be threatened by Amazon. And all of these other stores weren't even paying attention, like Macy's and Walmart. And now all of a sudden you look and you see that over the last 16 years, more or less, all of these companies have gone down in terms of their market cap. And Amazon has eaten all of that and still grown even more. So it's now worth more than all of them combined. So again, this is the reason why in 2011 Telefónica said, well, we can kind of see how the future is going to play out. Unless we do something a little bit different and work with these startups and these other innovators, we're not going to be able to compete going forward, and we all understand that. So globally, we've invested in 727 companies. We have 44 spaces around the world in 17 different countries. So Telefónica from the very beginning said, we take this so seriously that we're going to kind of really invest a lot of money. I think the figure is about $500 million that Telefónica has invested in this to make sure that we really do this seriously. The first Wayra Academy, as I mentioned, was launched in 2011 in Spain, and I ran that. And now we have 11 Wayra Academies all around the world. In terms of the UK, we've invested in about 160 companies. They've raised about $160 million, so these companies know how to raise money, and they're worth about $500 million. So, we're kind of choosing companies that we really hope will help Telefónica to identify new lines of business. And I think this is shown by the second number, which is that of these companies, they've done 100 pilot trials or contracts with Telefónica, which has generated about now it's actually closer to $10 million in revenue for the startups, and we actually have people whose full-time job is only to try and work on that relationship between Telefónica and the startups. And so what this has meant is that startups increasingly have said, well, Wayra UK is one of the top accelerator programs in the UK, and I would say probably in Europe as well, particularly because we're one of the only ones that really focus on business development. There are lots of accelerators that try to help startups raise, $100,000 or $1 million, whatever the case may be, but there are fewer that actually have the ability to really try and help the companies, at least try and validate the proposition and get feedback from Telefónica, and if that feedback is positive, then to see how to actually kind of build on that relationship. And we try to kind of really offer a bespoke program, which is the idea that we don't want to do master classes. We're not going to treat entrepreneurs as if they're like a charity case, as if this were some sort of CSR project. We understand that the entrepreneurs really understand their businesses really well, but they're coming to us because there may be certain questions or certain resources that they may need that we're able to offer. But we're not assuming that Telefónica knows these spaces better than the entrepreneurs. The reverse, we think that part of the reason we're doing this is to understand what it is that they're seeing that we might not be seeing. And I think that this approach then has generated kind of lots of really positive goodwill. I've only been in the UK for about 3 years, but luckily, thanks to Wayra, I've been able to meet the Duke of York and Prince Charles and Nick Clegg and Boris Johnson and will.i.am. And it's not just because they're interested in me personally. It's more that I think everyone, everywhere, is really trying to understand, well, if you're the UK and you're thinking about your future and you want to be able to compete with the United States or China and stay relevant, how are you going to do that if you don't have new businesses that become the Facebooks and the Apples and the Googles of tomorrow, right? So I think everyone, whether it's royalty or government or corporates, are trying to figure out, well, over the next 20 years, we understand that the world that we live in now is not going to look like the world of 20 years from now, so how are we going to be relevant in that world still, whether we're government or a corporation? And so we've done lots of partnerships because, again, I think a lot of people are very interested in making sure that they stay relevant. So this was a partnership that we did with the Cabinet Office over 2.5 years to see how entrepreneurs could actually solve social problems. We can't really just rely on government to solve big problems for us. Maybe we need to look at entrepreneurs and see how they may be able to take a unique take at it, and then just give them all the resources that they need to kind of scale that up. We also did something similar with a company called MSD, or Merck, the world's 4th largest pharmaceutical company, which is basically trying to understand, well, what happens after blockbuster drugs are no longer our main source of business? How are people going to use the digital space or digital applications to be able to solve some of these same problems that they have today that maybe now they take a drug to solve, but there may be other ways to do it technologically? We've also kind of worked with charities. So the charities as well have said, well, we understand that the approach of just giving money via grants and things like that, that's not really a sustainable model going forward. Again, similar to the Cabinet Office model, it may be possible to work with entrepreneurs to address issues of health or financial inclusion or poverty premium, which is what we're doing in Oldham, which is this idea that people who are poor pay more for basic services, usually utilities and things like that. So can we work with some of these utility companies and startups to try and address some of these issues? Even the GCHQ has said, well, cybersecurity, Hillary Clinton, Trump, everything, you just need to turn on your TV or read the newspaper, and you can see all of the costs and consequences of breaches and hacks. So the question is, if you're an organization like the GCHQ, how are you going to keep the UK secure by yourself? That's probably not going to be the case. You're going to need to rely on really clever entrepreneurs and make sure that the best of them are able to build up their businesses to become the cyber equivalent of a Facebook or a Google. And lastly, we're working, this is not the last one, in intelligent mobility, the idea that transportation really kind of is terrible in most parts of the world. Uber has shown that people are basically just sick of really bad transportation. Even if they're not dragging you off a plane, the idea is that usually it's still a pretty painful experience. So what are the other technological solutions that we can use to solve some of these issues like congestion and just a really terrible travel experience? And lastly, we're working on one with Sol Campbell, again, with this idea that we're trying to make sure that we democratize entrepreneurship and make sure that it's accessible to everyone, everywhere. It doesn't have to be only available to people who are based in Zone 1 and Zone 2 of London. It doesn't only have to be based to be given to people who have a certain race or gender or sexual orientation. Everyone should basically have the ability to access it. So we're working with Sol and opening up a space in Haringey with the Haringey Council. And I'm going to skip over these two slides and just end with this, which is this idea that is at the core of Jose Maria's thinking about Wayra, which is if you're a corporation, you only have two choices. You either are going to disrupt or you're going to end up being disrupted. And so we've made our choice. And now I would like to introduce you to some of the startups who are going to explain a little bit about their experience with us in Wayra, why they joined Wayra. I've tried to make sure that we have representation from all of the different academies. So first up we have Norman, who is with us from our GCHQ Accelerator in Cheltenham. Next up, we'll have Yi. I think she's on her way. She said she's 5 minutes away, but she's from our London Academy, and hopefully she'll be here soon. Next up, we have Mary from Memrica. So you guys can come to the stage already. Don't worry. Don't feel afraid. Mary from Memrica. From our Birmingham Academy. We have Sam from Zelo from our Intelligent Mobility Academy. And Rocky here, a nice picture of him with the Queen, all the way from the US, who last year was part of our partnership with Merck. Okay, so in true startup fashion, I thought that maybe we could start with each of you giving your 1 minute pitch, like who are you and why should we care?
Sure, so I am Rockwell Shaw, CEO of Pizziz, where we put people to sleep at the push of a button. So you may not know this, but poor sleep has been declared a public health epidemic. 70 million people in the US, 31% of Europe, globally 2 billion people suffer from insomnia. Now, the vast majority of these cases of poor sleep are caused by the same simple disease. It's just too much thinking, right? And the key is if you can quiet someone's mind, you can get them to fall asleep. And that's what Pizziz does. So we have this patented system that plays you a sleep-optimized mix of music, voiceover, and sound effects that changes each night that will quickly quiet your mind, put you to sleep, keep you asleep, and then wake you up feeling refreshed. It's a combination of academic psychoacoustics, clinical sleep hypnosis, and personalization through learning algorithms. It's wild, but it's incredibly effective. In fact, our iOS and Android apps have helped over 500,000 people from around the world get the best sleep of their lives. We've been written about in the New York Times, Wired, Sports Illustrated. J.K. Rowling said it was the best thing she's used for sleep by a mile. Roy Hibbert, the NBA basketball player, said it cured his Ambien addiction. Even your very own, the Duke of York, His Royal Highness, said everybody should download Pizziz because it works. It's been an amazing experience. So if you have any trouble sleeping or you like some help napping or even focus for work, download Pizziz. P-Z-I-Z-Z, or how you guys say it in the UK, P-Z-I-Z-Z. It's on the App Store. It's on Android Google Play. Download it. Change your sleep. Change your life.
Perfect. Okay. Mary?
Hi, everybody. I'm Mary Matthews, and I'm the founder of Memrica. We help people who are part of the fastest growing population in this world, the over 60s. And what are the problems the over 60s face? they actually can't remember stuff. Either they are facing challenges with their health, or they're worried about the fact that they're going to have dementia. And so what we do is we help them remember the things that matter most to them by collating information about the people and places automatically. And then we add those to reminders. So it's a really simple way of helping people to make the most of each day by helping them prepare for who they're going to meet, how they know them, what they normally talk about, the kind of thing that gives you social confidence. And without social confidence, you tend to withdraw, become isolated, depressed. This is also a public health issue that this generation is most likely to be the most costly for health services around the world. And the more you can empower those people to help themselves, the more help it's going to give governments around the world. So we've raised over £100,000 investment, including some from Uber, the famous taxi ride sharing company. We have recently launched on the App Store, and we're seeing a stickiness factor, so that's our monthly active users divided by our daily active users, of about 10%. So we're at an early stage of what we're doing. You can download it from the App Store. It's called Prompt by Memrica. Try it out, give me some feedback. We are currently pushing to raise that stickiness factor to over 10%, and we would really like your feedback to be able to do that.
Okay. All right.
My name is Norman Shaw. I'm the Chief Executive of ExactTrack, and we make mobile data security products, but with a bit of a difference. Unlike the majority of mobile data protection, which is software, our technology is embedded into the motherboards and processors of, or is being embedded by the major laptop manufacturers. It allows you to know where your data is, as it will report its position at any time. It doesn't require the internet at all because it uses out-of-band GSM technology. It'll allow you to set up geo zones where your data can be automatically accessed, and outside those areas it will not. It will tell you what files are being accessed, whether they're being printed, deleted, so we're talking about GDPR here. And if all else fails and you find your laptop is going down the M1 when you're in fact going down the M3, then you can send it a coded command and it'll actually deactivate the whole device. Or if you are really worried about it, you can send it another coded command and it will physically destroy all the memory store. So we're talking about James Bond here. And the final little trick up its sleeve is actually it doesn't mind whether your laptop's turned on or not. Because if it's turned off, it'll turn it on itself and deal with your data security problems. So if you were the one that lost the USB memory stick from Heathrow with all the royal protection on it, our USB device would have told them exactly where it was, and they could have saved the problem. So that's us. That's ExactTrack, and it's in your laptop.
My name's Sam. I'm the co-founder of a company called Zelo. We use data to understand where interurban transport demand exists and where the current public transport options let you down. So you've all been on crowded trains, you've all been on expensive trains, or maybe if you're unlucky enough, you've sat on a mega bus from Edinburgh to London and seen that it stops at every single town and city along the motorway to where you want to get to. So we essentially analyse where and when that demand exists, and we run pop-up coach routes on those routes to allow you to travel direct at lesser cost than you would on the existing public transport network. So we're a fully kind of pop-up demand network. We're super early, so we're less than a year old. We've got about 10,000 monthly users at the moment, and we've just raised £1.5 million led by Jaguar Land Rover. And we've just joined the Intelligent Mobility Accelerator program, which starts in a few weeks' time.
All right, perfect. And making the most dramatic entrance of all time, Yuri.
Hi, everyone.
We'll just give you a mic. We're doing our 1-minute pitches, so this will really test you. I'll take you the microphone.
Okay.
You can undress or whatever and talk at the same time.
me from human, and we use machine learning to decipher subliminal facial expressions into emotion and characteristics traits, including how happy you are, how passionate, or whether this person is lying or not.
Okay.
Is that 1 minute?
No, it's like 30 seconds.
Okay, I have another 30 seconds to go then. So our clients have been using our product in the field of sports intelligence, suicidal attempts prevention, mental state analysis, recruitment.
All right, perfect.
Thank you.
Okay, so I guess my first question to you guys is, and I don't know the audience what they're going to think, but a lot of people have been saying, accelerators actually serve no purpose. Accelerators, there's a bubble. People don't need accelerators. So I guess my first question to you, and we haven't really rehearsed anything, so I'm really excited to hear what they have to say as well. Why did you guys apply to an accelerator, and what do you think the lessons learned were? Especially a corporate one. The other part of the question would be, and what do you think the corporate brought to the table, if anything?
Okay, well, Gary, I think we were excited being in the technology cybersecurity area when we realized that the two areas that we needed help in, which was in technology and global deployment, therefore we had GCHQ, and it doesn't come much better than that on the technical side, and we have Telefónica as a global platform. So again, it gave us the reach that we wanted, and I think that the idea of an accelerator, it doesn't solve your problems. I think what it does do is it points you in the right direction, gives you access to world-leading companies and people, and it really does give you a kick up the bottom and say, get going, it's out there, we'll help you, but go and find some more, and why don't you bring them into us? So yeah, great program.
Okay.
And do we need them? By God, we do.
I guess, Rocky, I'm going to ask you as well, because you were in the kind of very unique Merck one, and you were in the pilot one, so you saw the good and the bad of launching it. I don't know if you have anything you want to add.
Yeah, so who are these people that say accelerators are overrated? Have they actually been through an accelerator program? Have they experienced it firsthand? Because if you have, you would know how powerful it is and how it can change fundamentally the landscape of your business. I went to Wayra and I met the Queen of England. I got into Merck Pharmaceuticals' corporate wellness program. Now think about that. Merck, a pharma company, even considerably one of our competitors, uses us in their own corporate wellness program. We're integrated into corporate nap pods all around the world at Mercedes, Zappos, we're at JFK Airport, we're at London Luton Airport. I mean, you name it, many of our milestones happened because we got into the accelerator. Now, they're not going to hand you things on a silver plate, right? You're still going to have to work, right? But they amplify, and this is the key, they amplify your effort. The more you put in, the more you're going to get out, but they're going to 3x it, or 4x it, or 5x it on top of what you did. And that's the amazing portion about it. But the key is, you really got to go to a good accelerator, right? Like Wayra.
Thanks for the plug.
You got paid? I haven't met a queen yet. I've only met a prince. So, Gary, something to work on for our promotion. For me, accelerator program, I think it's being part of the ecosystem. When you're working on your own project, your own startup, it's a very, very, very lonely journey. Now, being part of the ecosystem, when I look to left, look to my right, I see other miserable faces around me. So I think we encourage each other, we share tips, we share information, we share all of the network we have, and that's among what we get amongst ourselves as peer entrepreneurs. And then from the accelerator program itself, I've not attended others, so I can only speak about my experience at Wayra under Gary, how much they have helped us. So we have corporate connection. Directly, it's backed by Telefónica, and it's a global enterprise where we have access to all the large enterprise and their clients as well. So this is a very big plus compared to other accelerator. I think it's harder to compete with the position we are in. In addition to that, we also have access to, say, marketing guru. If we have technical questions or legal questions, we have other people to turn into as well. And then on to your second part of the question, whether it's a bubble. If it's bubble, it means it's growing. That's my definition of bubble. And the bubble isn't a bad word in my world unless it bursts. And so long as it's not bursting, so I guess we are still growing in this whole ecosystem.
Okay, and I guess for the audience, how many of you guys belong to corporates? Is everyone corporate?
Almost
All right, so now the second question would be, even though it's great to be in an accelerator and Wayra is really wonderful, it is also sometimes painful to work with corporates. So if you were to kind of give advice to all of these corporates in the room, what would that be? Like, what is it that you would want that they would change? I mean, not specifically Wayra. You can also talk about Telefónica if you want to. But I mean, more generally, what would be the thing you would say, listen to me, this is what I need from you?
So it's not really so much, listen to me, this is what I need from you. It's more that startups need to be coached on the language that corporates speak to demonstrate that.
Vice versa.
And vice versa. But in startup corporate relationships, one of the things that startups don't really understand is how to pose the opportunity to the corporate in such a way that the corporate gets very hungry about it, right? That looks at it and understands the massive opportunity that's before them. And so I think one of the key things is that communication barrier, right? So teaching startups how to think like the corporate a bit, and the startups teaching the corporate how to think like a startup a bit.
I'd also add availability. So the open-mindedness that goes with teaching startups how to make the business case that's going to resonate with that individual corporate is actually being able to share much more of your thinking in a safe space through an accelerator like Wayra can be really, really helpful. So it's not that you're putting everything out there so that your competitors can actually steal your ideas or your pace or your thinking, but it's actually being much more open to have that conversation with a safe partner that can actually protect your IP, protect your business relationship, but also being clear to the startup who is the best person to talk to, what's the route in, as well as what's the opportunity.
Yeah, I think for me, just to add to that, is what the route's in. I think everybody needs a kind of senior sponsor within these organisations, because I've been involved in a lot of conversations with corporates, and that could be football clubs, it could be Jaguar Land Rover, it could be mobile phone networks, and you feel like you're getting somewhere, and then the sort of some employees further down the organisation drop the ball because it's obviously not key to what they're doing. And I think it's all about giving startups a senior sponsor and allowing that senior sponsor to drive them through any conversation.
I think there's the thing that we have found, particularly dealing with people like Hewlett-Packard and AMD and other manufacturers, is that they are so focused on what their shareholders and their share price is that they do fail to see the fact that in front of them there's tiny little minnows that have incredible innovative opportunities, and they can turn something around in months, sometimes weeks, where it would cost a lot of money and sometimes years and a loss of focus from the corporate. And I often wonder why they don't put a little bit of money aside that allows you to experiment with some of the young entrepreneurs and really try some exciting ideas that may not become commercial, but a bit like venture capital, you've really got to get one or two that really hit it good to make it worthwhile. And I think the cost is very small, the cost in management is not that big, and if you come from an accelerator like Wayra, actually they've got a bloody good grounding in the first place.
Can I just add to that? Please don't continually ask us for pilots, because that's the kiss of death. If you want to experiment with working with a startup, actually make a commitment. Say, yes, we want to try this, and this is the commitment we will make if it works. And work with us to address any issues that perhaps don't work as well as you had expected or don't hit the goals that you had expected. Because it could be that we can change. It could be that we can work together to solve a problem together. But if you are constantly asking us to say, oh, I'd like to try this, I'd like to try this, I'd like to try this, that's a really, really hard thing to do for a very, very small business. Because we are chasing the opportunity, but we are also stretched in many, many directions.
Before having my startup, I come from large corporation background. I used to work at Credit Suisse, so I quite understand how difficult it is to push for a change in an organization, and a change happens because we need a change to happen because there's a pain point there. All of us suffer from it, from within and outside. Now I left the corporate world, I become an outsider, and I'm pushing the change from outside to inside. I found it's very, very, very difficult. There's money there, there's willingness there for innovation, and it's still staying at a very high level. So I see there's a lack of engagement. If every cell in the organization is pushing this through, then this is going to happen. It's not only top level says X, Y, Z. Okay, let's do innovation. And then what? So we have done pilots. Some lead to sales contracts, some are not. And it's very, very, very telling from our perspective, comparing corporate A to corporate B, the speed of action is how much we can measure whether this thing is going to happen or not. And then there's only one company in the PR tomorrow is going to say they did this innovation. Not number 2, not number 3, even though all of these started at the same time. So from our perspective, we really hope, the speed of execution can be really pushed forward a little bit.
Okay, so now I'm going to ask another question focusing more on your long-term vision, because we've heard a bit about your one-minute pitches, kind of the pros and cons of working with accelerators and corporates. Where do you guys want to be in 5 years? And I'm going to actually throw in some conditions since we're in the UK. People don't like to talk about it, but things like Brexit, things like that. How are you kind of imagining your journey over the next 5 years?
We've got a development team in Barcelona, so I'm a bit more worried about the Republic of Catalonia at the moment. But for us, we're kind of 9 months into our journey, so it's still super early. I think we have an inkling of how big what we're doing can be, but we don't truly know. So it's a very difficult question to say where we'll be in 5 years' time. I think for us, we're operating in the mobility space, which, if anyone's kind of followed the news recently, is obviously ever changing with things like driverless cars and everything that, all that hype that's going on at the moment. So it's super interesting to see where all of that's going to be kind of end up, and we want to be an integral part of that new network and how people travel in the future. And fundamentally, we just want to try and redesign how people travel around their needs as opposed to around the needs of the operators. And we think there's a fundamentally kind of new model for that. I won't comment on Brexit because I'm worried about Spain.
Okay.
I'm not worried about Brexit at all because I think global data protection is a global issue, and whichever country you're in, I think it's fundamentally irrelevant because you've got exactly the same problems. I think that over time, because our product is built into manufacturers' hardware and it gives managed service suppliers additional revenue streams they haven't got, I would be kind of surprised if ExactTrack is not acquired relatively quickly because it gives them differentiation, and we also have some form of exclusivity in our patents. So I think that probably I would see us being acquired relatively soon by one of the larger players or one of the managed service suppliers to bolt on what we've got onto other services so they have a much more integrated management profile.
In 5 years' time, I know that we are going to be a key player in the ageing population and supporting them to keep healthy. Again, I'd expect us to be acquired by a health tech company or an insurer that wants to provide a seamless experience for people as they age and keeping them well. In terms of Brexit, I think there are going to be some challenges in terms of harmonisation of tax regimes, VAT, for example. And we have a European development team as well, so that again potentially is a challenge. But actually in terms of the market, you know, populations are aging around the world, and these populations are increasingly tech savvy. So these populations are increasingly having to take control of their own health, and they're turning to technology to do this more and more. So actually in terms of business growth, I don't see any issue. I think it's going to be on the nitty-gritty sort of operational side we'll see the challenges.
So I've talked quite a bit about sleeping in my pitch, but really we're defining a new genre of music called functional music. It's music with a purpose, right? Music for things other than entertainment. And sleeping and napping are our first modules, but actually today we just launched the focus module. So it's music for work, music to help you become more productive. And I see ourselves expanding out even more, so that, you know, whatever physiological state you want to get your body in, we can use sound to get you there instead of medication. You know, in terms of Brexit, it doesn't have a large impact on our business because we are an app-focused business. So, I mean, we already operate in 160 countries. Our team is already in 3 separate countries. I think the biggest thing is that I just won't be caught dead holding British pounds. So even though we're a UK LTD, the currency fluctuations are just too great. And so, you know, we take money in from the app in, you know, 100 plus different countries. And we do a lot of different currencies. And I will not be holding British pounds because there's just way too much uncertainty in the economy, and that, you know, I can't allow that to affect our cash flow.
5 years down the road, exit, hopefully. Hopefully we helped everyone around us understand our own emotion and personality a little bit better. Brexit, no Brexit, I'm still an entrepreneur. I'm still going to push my business forward. So I'm not worried about Brexit by term of itself. But I am worried about what made Brexit happen, and it is happening across whole Europe. This is my real concern, and it's very real that's happening in our generation, which is very, very sad. Our tech team is moving away from the UK to China. I am keeping talents in the UK as well in terms of another core part, data science team in the UK as well. So I'm not saying that I'm moving the whole talents away. There's talents, and I am just going to start hedging our position in terms of talents, cash flow, investment, everything.
All right, perfect. All right, so I think now we can open it up to you guys if you have any questions instead of just having me ask questions. Does anyone have any questions from the audience? Oh, one over here. Maybe we can take one of the mics. Oh, you guys have those.
Okay. Well, one of the things that I heard you saying most of the time, for some of you, is like, I expect to be acquired. And some ideas that you just shared with us on your companies, I think that are more interesting to be shared with many companies instead of acquired by one company. So how do you see that? Because it's just an exit, let us say, an exit strategy of your business that you just created, or you really want to see it growing in a way that really benefits the most amount of people?
It's like, my name is E. I was born in China. I came here, I'm still E. I may get married one day, I'm still E, right? So I exit, I sell my business to another company, it still exists. There is a continuation. But it has to be for the best benefits of the shareholder and the stakeholder for the society as well. It doesn't change the nature, impacts everything. It's just the journey of the business entity on its own. So that's my view.
I completely agree with that. I think that all of us are in it to make a difference, whether that's in technology, whether that's in social environment. But actually, our bigger vision is to make a bigger difference. And if we can do that by selling our companies to a bigger player and move on and do other things, that's amazing. Personally, I am part of the baby boomer generation. I will need to retire at some point. And, sit on my yacht in the Caribbean, enjoying life. That doesn't mean to say that I'm any different. I will still be a person with ideas and person with drive and person who wants to make things happen. So actually, selling my company could help me do even more in the future.
So can I push you guys a little bit, because this is sounding too kumbaya? Don't you think that one of the problems that you have in the UK generally is that founders sell too early for too little money, whereas if you're in the US, you can create a Facebook because someone actually has the courage to stick it out until the very end and make a lot of money?
I think it's a story. I don't see it playing out in the marketplace, though. So, for instance, I'll give you an example. TBH, they're an app that hit the App Store 10 weeks ago. They were on the App Store, they launched, 9 weeks later, Facebook bought them. American company, right? Bought them for under 100 million, undisclosed. We're seeing an age where the big tech companies are snatching up. It doesn't matter about geography, UK, US, wherever you are. The big tech companies are seeing opportunities and snatching them up before they get too big to compete with them. And that is just universal.
Yeah,
So
but
you can't blame the UK.
No, but you can though, because the thing is that you still do have companies like Snapchat that said, no, I'm not saying that every company is going to resist an offer for $4 billion, but what I am saying is that there's still enough money and enough ambition to say, actually, 20 million is not that much money, right? I'm sticking around for $1 billion.
I mean, that's fair. I mean, especially for me, I never talk about exit specifically. I don't think that way. That's not how my brain was wired. My brain is wired to just build the best product, the best company I can possibly build, and whatever happens, happens. If that means we end up running it at scale, phenomenal. If that means there's another company that we can partner with or sell to, and exit to, and that helps increase the impact, I mean, great. But I'm not wired to think that way. And I think, all right, so as an American, I guess maybe it's culturally embedded in me to just go bigger and better.
Basically. Okay, let me see. Next question.
Gary.
Oh, for me.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
How much stake do you take in the companies in your accelerator program?
Oh, wow. No, so I mean,
And how much stake do you intend to take? So when you start, and then when they leave.
so I would say there are two answers. At the very beginning of the program, and this is maybe one of the lessons that we learned in Wayra, we started to try to work with very early stage companies. And we realized that actually wasn't really useful from a Telefónica point of view, because these weren't companies that we could kind of plug into Telefónica anytime soon. And we're looking to try and create these new lines of business relatively soon. So over time, we've kind of moved to kind of looking for companies that are a bit more mature, companies that already have a product in the marketplace, companies that might also have already raised a lot of money, and that's no longer a barrier. So the answer would be, in the case of the standard companies where they're still very, very early stage, we usually take 7 to 10% in exchange for about £70,000 in cash and services. But if we find a company that is really interesting to us, and this is increasingly becoming the model, then we are willing to negotiate to make sure that we're not asking the existing investors to take a down round. Because what shouldn't be the case is that I invested in your company a year or two ago at one valuation, and Wayra comes in and says, oh, I want a lower valuation than your last investor. That would be really, really silly for everyone involved. So we always try to respect the last valuation of the company.
Keyword there, negotiate.
Yeah.
Last question, I think.
Hello. The question is about how the program works. So how do you select entrepreneurs, or how is the process of submitting the business cases? How does it work?
So this is kind of another evolution of the program. When we first started, it was kind of completely horizontal. We would take we wouldn't take any company. We would apply any company. We would invite any company to apply, and then we would receive hundreds of applications. We would then have a selection process where the first round would be internal with different people from Telefónica and us saying these are the companies that we like the best. Hopefully the idea at that phase is to try and find someone within the organization that almost would want to sponsor it. so you can kind of get these pilots and trials. And then in the last phase, we would invite investors, so from the top VCs in the UK or internationally, to kind of come in and say, what do you think about these companies? And if a company receives a majority yeses from top investors, then we know that that's interesting. So we have both the Telefónica part, more or less covered. Telefónica says it's going to be interesting. And then we have, this is also a good startup independent of whatever Telefónica decides that it may want to do with it. Now what we're doing, and you can kind of see it here as well, is we're saying, we can build entire accelerators that are only focused on one theme, because there are people within that vertical that have resources and sufficient interest and convoking power to allow us to kind of really do something a lot better than what we might be able to do by ourselves. So an example of that would be cybersecurity. We've had cybersecurity companies in the past, but then if GCHQ comes and says, well, we want to open up a space in Cheltenham, right outside of the donut, in an undisclosed location, so I can't say where, but we're going to open up a space in Cheltenham. We're going to fund most of it, and what you need to do is to basically give us your know-how, and then you can kind of invest in the best ones as you may determine. Well, then that becomes a lot more interesting. So we're moving now to this more verticalized approach where we choose a local, a significant partner in an industry and work with that person to then find more mature companies and then have a bigger portfolio of potential partners for the companies as well.
Brilliant. Well, I'm afraid that is time.
Okay, yeah, if you have any other questions, this is my email, so you can just send me an email and I'll try to answer you.
So please, big round of applause for Gary and the startup.